This week we're dealing with the ancient Near East. And basically we're dealing with what would be called Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, this whole area. And this is really the area between the Euphrates and the Tigris, moving through modern day Iraq, parts of the Levant, so Syria, Lebanon, Israel. It even moves into parts of Turkey. It sort of depends on whose definition you want to deal with. And the importance here is that this is the first foundations of Western civilization, where we're moving beyond simply a village or a town, and we're moving into something closer to an empire. So as we move forward, we're going to see some significant changes in human development and thus changes in art. There's a lot of trade going on during this period. So even though you wouldn't think of it, there is trade. There is an early Silk Road running from essentially India all the way to Egypt, probably into Europe as well. And what we see is the Indus River civilizations in modern day Pakistan and India are actively trading with what we would call Mesopotamia. Makes sense. There's both land and sea routes between the two that are fairly easy. I mean, basically you have Afghanistan, Iran between the two. So it is something that is passable. And they are moving art, as we will see, back and forth. And here we see the first seeds of civilization, about 5000 BC. A little bit earlier than the Egyptians, arguably, although there are developments in Egypt this early as well. And these first seeds of civilization give us really the basis, as I said, of what we will know as Western civilization. In terms of religion, they are polytheistic. Many of their gods have animal-like characteristics, again, dealing with those sort of anamorphic figures, where we're going to see animal and human characteristics to give us the idea that a figure is a god rather than being a person. And we have major gods, Marduk, Inanna, etc. The thing to keep in mind is each town, each city would have its own god. And if you were conquered, your god would be seen to have died and been conquered by the conquering god. It's a very interesting idea, and it's part of what makes Judaism stand out when that comes into the picture, because after they are conquered by the Assyrians and the Neo-Babylonians, their god continues, whereas every other god prior to that had died or been brought into the larger pantheon of the conquering party. And we're going to start with the Sumerians. Now, the Sumerians are made up of self-governed city-states. We're going to see the same thing from the Greeks, for example. And this means that each city is sovereign. It controls its economy, its army, its education, its infrastructure, everything. So each one is completely independent, and they control the land around them. And then we're going to see them start fighting, start conquering each other, and we develop into larger city-states, eventually into kingdoms and empires. In terms of agriculture, the entire agricultural system is based on irrigation from the Tigris and the Euphrates. They are amongst the earliest irrigation systems that we see, and it allows them to farm land that is, well, not the greatest. They also give us writing, amongst other things. The oldest written language is cuneiform. By the way, you can get a cuneiform tablet, some of the oldest writing in the world, for as little as $500 on the antique market. So it is available. Their writing is primarily pictograph. So it starts as a picture and then it sort of abstracts into an idea. This is what will eventually give us language as we know it today. They're also developing mathematics. So their numbering system is base 60. So that's where we get 60 seconds, 360 degrees, all of those things that drove you nuts in math. Their measurement of time basically creates what we know as the modern calendar today. They use triangles and measuring rope to set up land and boundary. They likely came up with the Pythagorean theorem. Pythagoras proved the theorem, but didn't develop the idea of, for example, the 3-4-5 rule. And the Sumerians were familiar with basic geometry. Now, this isn't, advanced geometry, but they are aware of the basics to a level at which they can go ahead and create pretty much whatever they need to. Very, very modern. They developed the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is really all about this idea of civilization versus the wilderness. To them, before the age of Gore-Tex, the wilderness is something you want to avoid. You don't go camping, you avoid it. You stay home, you try and make things comfortable. You try not to be eaten by wild beasts, which Gore-Tex may or may not stop you from being eaten by. I'm not sure. I don't camp much. But at the end of the day, that is their big concern. And the wilderness represents things that are unknown, unpredictable, volcanoes, earthquakes, floods, natural disasters, etc., animals, weather, whereas civilization represents all those things that are good in life. I'm very much generalizing it. The Epic of Gilgamesh goes into other things. Their leaders tend to start out as what are called big men. So this idea of the leader is the person who can really take care of the most people, really should be the poorest in the community. And they're going to become religious leaders. Initially, they're secular leaders. They become religious leaders, kind of developing these ideas of what leadership is. By the way, in terms of genders, amongst the Sumerians, there is divorce, there is child support, there's relative equality relative to really most of Western history, where we generally live in very, very patriarchal societies, especially the cultures that we see as highly developed. Whereas here, what we see is something with a great deal more equality. Why? Well, it's actually a practical matter. People die at a younger age, there are more accidents, there are more issues that come up. And so the ability of a woman to inherit, for example, land, or to be able to continue on after the death of her husband is going to be particularly important. And so that leads to a lot of these laws and rules that we see coming out of the Sumerians. That being said, let's take a look at some of their art.